Good morning, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us in person, and good morning to whoever is joining us online for our first live stream. And today is the second consecutive educational event at LuginsLand of Art, followed by the first one, Art and Architecture. Today we have an event on art and archaeology, and the educational event is compromised by a tour, and then we have also a restoration process in the front of the villa. And now we have a talk, a conversation with two speakers, Annalise Agius, who's here with me, who is an archaeologist who works with the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage, as well as Victor Agius, who will be joining later, who is a local artist, and he's also one of the artists currently exhibiting in the exhibition we have going on in the villa called Space and Time, curated by Boris Kudlichka. Just an introduction about LuginsLand of Art. LuginsLand of Art is driven by the OmenaArt Foundation. The OmenaArt Foundation is founded by Omenaa Mensah, philanthropist and art lover. The space is being open to the public between March and May through 5 different events. We have 3 more events actually coming up. This is the second one. The next event will be art and conservation, followed by art and technology, and then the last one and the closing is art and legacy. We invite you all to share this event, and it is an opportunity for people to visit this magnificent space and really interesting initiative being offered by the foundation. So we will start with Annalise. Annalise, today we'll be talking more about archaeology, its process, and its context with art. I know that Villa LuginsLand have been working from the very beginning with the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage. There's ongoing work and collaboration. Can you give us a bit of context of what and who the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage is and what you do?
So, good morning. I am Annalise. I'm here on behalf of the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage. The Superintendents of Cultural Heritage is the state regulator for cultural heritage in Malta. The Superintendents was created in 2003 following the Cultural Heritage Act of 2002. And it is the mission of the Superintendents to fulfill the duties of the state in terms of cultural heritage and to ensure the protection and accessibility of cultural heritage in Malta. However, one has to define what cultural heritage is, and the definition of cultural heritage in the Cultural Heritage Act in Malta is quite one which covers a lot of aspects. It goes even into the intangible heritage, audiovisual material, etc. We can see that it means movable or immovable objects, artistic, architectural, historical, archaeological, ethnographical, paleontological, geological, etc. It goes into tangible and intangible heritage, so we can see that it covers all forms of cultural heritage. The office of the superintendent is what operates the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage. By law, the superintendent is the regulator of cultural heritage. Obviously, offices had to be created in order for the superintendent to be in a position to fulfill his duties. There are the offices of the superintendent, Heritage Planning Consultations Restoration Monitoring Unit, the National Inventory Research and Archaeology Unit, which I form part of, and the Support Services Unit. Basically, throughout planning applications, the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage is one of the planning consultees when it comes to development. The consultation with the superintendents goes through the Heritage Planning Consultation and Restoration Unit. Once this unit deems it necessary that the site is in an archaeologically sensitive area, archaeological monitoring is imposed, and that is where my unit comes in. And we oversee the construction, development, excavation, etc. of sites during the planning process. There are also excavations and archaeological studies going on in sites where there aren't development, where the superintendent is also a regulator for such instances.
Thank you. Very interesting, a lot of hard work, I know. So how are archaeologists studying Villa LuginsLand? Can you tell us more about the processes being used, what you are maybe aspiring to find?
So, Villa LuginsLand has been known to be in an archaeologically sensitive area since before even the start of works. The villa itself is scheduled at grade 1, which means that it merits the highest protection when it comes to the building itself. It's in the area of archaeological importance of Rabat and Mdina, therefore it means that the surrounding area is very archaeologically sensitive. In fact, we can see that Villa LuginsLand is marked in blue, that's the site footprint, and all the blue dots are known archaeological features in the area. So basically, Villa LuginsLand is surrounded by known archaeological features. Having said that, at the back of the site, there is also an archaeological feature. There is a small photo on the side, which is basically ashlar masonry dating possibly to the classical period. Some of it is in its place, and some of it might have been moved to put it back as one whole feature. So before the start of the works at the villa, we already knew of the importance of the site. When the application to restore the villa and the gardens was at planning stage, and it still is, archaeologists and people from the superintendent's consultation unit deemed it necessary to have an archaeological evaluation, which means that we get to understand and study if there is an archaeology present before a permit is issued. So my team was contacted in order to start this process. What we did here, and what we are still doing, because the process is not yet concluded, was first clear the vegetation to understand whether there has been any archaeology already present on top of the soil. Once the vegetation was cleared, it was requested that a GPR, which is a ground penetrating radar, study is conducted. This is important because using GPR technology, one gets to know whether there are any archaeological features or archaeology present without any intrusive methods. And based on the result of the GPR, we started works with trial trenches. Basically, trial trenches were carried out in order for us to understand where the archaeology is at based on the result of the GPR. In the meantime, we are still doing the trial trenches, but the upcoming works will include open excavation. So there will be further soil removal and further studying of the deposits and archaeology by the archaeologists who are present on site.
Very interesting. I know that there might be some documentation that hints to specific findings in this area. Can you elaborate more on that?
So the Rabat area and the Mdina area has been documented since basically forever. But getting into the site specifics, in 1819, there was a report in a government gazette which stated that in another excavation near the old city of Notabile, Mdina, there have been found 60 earthen vases filled with bones of a very small size, therefore supposed to be those of children or small animals. They have 2 Phoenician inscriptions cut onto 2 stones of the country, a palm and a half high, but only a third of a palm broad, resting upon a foot of the same sort of stone, by which it appears to have been fixed in the rock. The rough shape of the vases seems to indicate an antiquity contemporary with the dominion of that nation, of whose letters and language the inscriptions are composed. So basically, in the 1819, a discovery was made somewhere in Rabat, containing 60 vases, containing the burnt bones of small children and small animals, together with 2 stele, which are commemorative tombstones. Until 2012, although the documentation was present, not many people studied it. In 2012, Professor Nicholas Vella from the University of Malta further elaborated on the government gazette. And with the help of the government gazette and other documentation referring to the documentation in 1819, he was able to give the approximate location of the findings. Unfortunately, the 60 vases are of unknown location, and there is only one of the stele at the collection of the National Museum of Archaeology. The other probably remains in a private collection. So basically, this was one of the most interesting finds to have been discussed about the Rabat area.
So are you hoping to find them here?
So basically, throughout the course of works, in one of the trial trenches earlier last year, we found traces of the stele. We found circa 20 of the stele, which might indicate that, as had been correctly pinpointed by Professor Vella, this might have been the location of the discovery of the 60 vases of filled with small bones and the stele with inscriptions. Unfortunately, to date, although we're hoping that when further works are carried out, we discover more. And to date, unfortunately, we only have stele without any inscriptions. So basically, possibly what would have happened is that the most interesting discoveries would have been taken off-site, and what was deemed to be less interesting was chucked within the material. But it's still at the very early stages for us to understand completely what happened, but it appears that the site was indeed what contained this discovery.
Very interesting. It's always like an ongoing process,
Yes,
right? It's
yes.
never ending. Archaeology has shaped and taught us a lot about of our history and who we are and who we were. And as you said, Rabat is known for these findings. Was there like a particular finding within this area which was a very strong historical and cultural impact for Malta?
I think most of the discoveries found in Rabat are very archaeologically and historically important. Rabat dates back to the Bronze Age period. Then when we go to the Punic and Phoenician period, we have the creation of Melite, which was the city. And outside the city walls, we still find a lot of archaeology. One must remark that within the city walls, no burials were carried out. So all the burials are outside the city walls, which for the most part is modern Rabat. Having said that, we have also Roman period burials, structures, etc. So it seems that Rabat has been populated and lived in since the Bronze Age forwards. Every site in Rabat is very important because it shows furthermore what was happening throughout the area and possibly also the Maltese Islands during every different period in history and archaeology.
Very interesting. From your personal perspective, is there how do you interpret archaeology in a way that it's almost like a process, just like an artistic process that inspires societies and inspires change sometimes as well?
I think art is very well represented in archaeology. Even in prehistory, we see that people started creating visual representations, of humans, anthropomorphic representations, stone carvings, etc. And this continued throughout archaeology. In fact, we have the anthropomorphic representations dating back to prehistory, and artistically, I think we continued to evolve, so to say, although prehistoric art is wonderful in my opinion. I think throughout archaeology, art gave us an insight on what might have been the thought processes at the time. Certain patterns on pottery help us to decipher which period they come from. Representations of shapes, murals, etc., and catacombs help us to determine what religion was practiced and what people were actually buried in those catacombs. There's representations, for example, the Horus and Anubis gold pendant, which is only 2.5 centimeters. It was found in a tomb in Malta in the early 1900s, and it has Egyptian representation. So that makes us debate on whether it was just used as a decoration or there were other religious purposes for it. So art, apart from giving us clear indication of maybe some of the thought processes, it shows us the skill of the people at the time, because we can see that even from prehistory, people were very much skilled artistically, and it helps us to date also archaeological sites and features.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Annalise. That was really insightful. We will have time to ask you questions later on. We will invite Victor Agius now to speak more about and elaborate more about artistic process. Okay, no problem. Not now. But the screen. How are you, Vic? Good morning. Ah, 1 second. It's on. Okay. Oh, Aurora, sec. We are very lucky. It's a very sunny day, but we are also melting. So we just take a while to shift for some shade. Victor, you came all the way from Gozo this morning. Yeah. Thank you for being here. You have the... Okay. So Victor is an established local artist. He mainly works in ceramics and natural materials, but obviously his work is reinterpreted in many ways, even performances. And Victor is also one of the artists selected for the exhibition Space and Time. And his work here, he will tell you more about it later, is a site-specific piece, and which will remain as part of the villa. So, Victor, I will leave you to present your work and your processes.
Good morning. Thank you to the foundation for this incredible opportunity. I come from Gozo. My studio is in Shara. I was brought up in Shara. Okay. My father is a sculptor, so the direct link with art, with materials, with wood, stone, marble was always present. It still is my playground, going into his studio and seeing how from a tree trunk or a piece of eroded limestone, he did his sculptural interventions in that. Later on, I furthered my studies both locally and abroad. My practice is all rooted about nature, about materials, and about the narratives which are in these various materials. So I am not an archaeologist, but indirectly, my studio has like an archive of different recipients, buckets, containers of different sands, different clays, imported clays, which I use for my ceramics. But now that we have all these construction sites literally opening wounds in our territory, in our islands. So for me, that's like an opportunity as Earth is manifesting itself. So hidden narratives are coming out to the fore. And for me, that's materia prima to do my artistic research there, to test materials, try something in my ceramic skin. Most of my works and interventions were also and are site-specific. So there were times where, for example, back in 2013, I collaborated with a composer, a gazetting composer, Dr. Mariela Kassar, and author Emmanuel Mifsud, and we did like 4 years researching Gigantea, not as a romantic idea of a prehistoric important UNESCO monument, but to elicit universal themes like ritual, like what makes life, death, regeneration, those spirals, that continuation. So in my case, it was like how were these rituals manifested through art, their funerary practices. When I was around 10 years old in my village, Shara Stone Circle was being excavated. So for me, that was also an experience that marked me a lot. And thanks to my father, Mario, who always encouraged me to be present at these important moments, I think it was also part of my artistic education. In Gigantea, we did a project. It was back in 2013, 10 years ago. So the first part was an intervention in the space itself. It was created by Professor Vince Briffa. So there was contemporary music being played live, and I had sculptural and video installations in the site, always respecting this high sensitive site. And most of the themes were about life, about our relationship with the earth, how we consume the earth, how our buildings are like containers so that ritual can happen there, being a place for being a theater, being a temple, being a cemetery. So all these themes are always present in my work in a way or another. I don't say that I work in sculpture, even though here I'm represented by those 2 ceramic sculptures there. But I work also in painting. I use also performance and installation. But in a way, nature has to be there in a way or another, even if it's a video work. In Gigantea, I had video, I had works in bronze, and even works with found materials. So this was the second part of the project. It was in Spazio Creativo in Valletta. So here I literally wanted to transport the metaphor of Mother Earth, Mother Nature, gauzed in blue clay, which after the exhibition it was returned to Vecchia Hill in Asri, where it was brought. Sometimes I literally go to where they are building or excavating to make underground garages. You see them throwing and mixing construction waste in a skip, and for me that will be like a super art shop to get my art materials. So it's like giving a second life to these materials, which I then transcend and add another layer of meaning or form. This particular work on the left, that's called Mother. It's a 3-meter sculpture. It's like there is the link going back to your ancestors, motherhood, Mother Nature. Most of these large installations after exhibitions or interventions, they literally deteriorate and go back to nature. On the right-hand side, there is a documentation of the photo here is a bit cropped. So back in 2010, after after I finished my studies in Central St. Martin's in London, a part of the cemetery in Shara was being enlarged, so new tombs and graves were being excavated and were being built. And I always wanted to do something in these sites because for me, archaeology is very alive beneath the earth as I search the ground. So that's something which is very important for me, not just spiritually, but there is spirit in matter in my credo of doing and practicing in my studio. So I obtained a permit even from the local church, and that was very positive, that I wanted to do something private there, but literally using ashes, clay, my body, and a photographer. So I hired the grave digger to open my family tomb's grave, which was still new, intact. It was just being built. And I did a performance there using clay and my body and ashes as if reflecting on how we are matter and back to matter we shall return. These were shown in different galleries, both internationally and even in Valletta. That's another site-specific work a few meters away from here. So back in 2016, I collaborated again with Ars Vitae Ensemble, the same composer, Mariella, and author Emanuel. And we did a project at St. Agatha's Catacombs. Again, so it's a church site, but they understood our genuine idea, and we were granted permission to do a performance there. So there was a choir, but I had sculptures which were literally in the tombs of these catacombs. So one of the specific works was, because the first thing you do, you study the place. You have to respect the place. And in these catacombs, there were different peoples of different cultures and different religions buried there. So there was this thing of inclusivity. And there is a feature on the right-hand side at the lower part where under the skull, there are stone pillows. So you archaeologists know better this than me for sure. So I literally casted a pillow from home in cement, then I did it in ceramics, and I wrote the word rest engraved on it in about 6 or 7 languages, Latin, Arabic, Maltese, English, and others. And they were placed there in this site. There were many other interventions, but we have to be a bit. So this is another intervention I had at Mdina Cathedral Museum. That was the Mdina Biennale. It was about materiality, the other. So I wanted to go back to our roots. Culturally, we speak a lot about the Pauline tradition, St. Paul. So I literally collaborated with some artists who use for our local festas, and I recasted some of their faces, which they use for St. Paul, but I filled these casts with my materials, which in this case was terra rossa, red ochre, soils, which make a large part of my artistic production in my studio. So with these roots, with these different sands of gozo and different clays and terra rossa, I had like 6 different casts of St. Paul, but here they are in dialogue with a very important panel painting, which is there at the background in the museum. To take a break from my works here, I can say something also about my ceramic intervention here at the villa. When I first arrived here, obviously, it's a very intriguing story here about the richness of and the different layers of histories, the architecture, the space. So when I entered here, thanks to you and the curator and the foundation, they literally gave me that artistic liberty, and that helped a lot. So the first place I went first, I was amazed by the sculptures, especially in the facade. But then I went straight on the left-hand side where I saw that barren terrain being excavated. And I literally documented all these elements. I then decided to take some casts with silicone of some architectural features, especially the staircase outside. The idea was of doing this like a monolith rising from this garden, so something which is nurtured, cultures which keep developing and even speaking about our ancestors. And that's a stoneware sculpture. It's fired for around 1280 degrees with glazes and even 24-karat gold. But then some of the features from the architectural sculptures, those flowers, were literally recasted in grass, in clay, which were part then of the final sculpture to make that dialogue also with the place. Some of the glazes were left not that shiny whitish glaze, but I went for earthy tones, especially the smaller one, which has terracotta hues. And that was also taken from those two important figures, terracotta sculptures, which adorn the facade when you enter this villa. So this was an exhibition I had at Eduardo Secchi Contemporary Space in Florence. It was curated by Pietro Galliano, Spectacle, Mass Spectacle it was called. And literally, I borrowed the iconography of the twin statuettes, which were excavated a few meters away from my studio, Shara Stone Circle. The twin seated figures, which are very famous. Today, we use them a lot for our touristic brochures. But since I was exhibiting in Florence, this time, instead of filling these with soil or terra rossa, I used the material of the Florentine Renaissance idiom, which is Carrara marble. So these were sculpted in Carrara, and they were exhibited in this space in Florence. There were other sculptures, but we are taking just a very, very brief summary of my production. There's this space in Eduardo Secchi Gallery. There is also St. Paul in soil on the left-hand side. That's taken from Melchior Gaffa, the famous work of, obviously, Valletta. So you see also the relation between different materials, but how these materials all have their narratives to tell, both about us, our ancestors, and maybe also for our future. So this was selected for the Premio Internazionale of Faenza in Italy. It's one of the most famous ceramic biennales internationally. And here we have like a 3-meter floor assemblage of terra rossa. Sometimes I use also this material to grind and make my own pigments for my large earth paintings. And we are also seeing now concrete bricks. So now, instead of having soil and concrete bricks reaching towards our beautiful skies today, here bricks are again going down, and there are like coral or rugged ceramics which are rising from this installation that was called Earth Rituals. These are some other ceramics of mine. Some of them were even exhibited at Denmark, which is the European Ceramic Biennale in Bornholm. Most of my ceramics are a fusion, thanks to a lot of research and experiments. Sometimes you have tiny explosions in the kiln, other times you're happy with the results, but that's part of the process. So it's like the other way around, sometimes of an archaeologist, where you are removing layers to extract information, valuable histories. But sometimes I do extract, but then I do the other way around when I add again layers upon each other to build up narratives. Okay. So this was also linked with that earlier project I had at Gigantia and Spazio Creative, but then it was selected for Viva International Festival by Prof. Rafael Vella. That was called Genesis. It was a 3-meter spherical form, also from recycled local clays, which later then it was returned on site. That was the Fine Arts in Valletta, the museum before then we moved to Musa. Okay, so these were some of the other installations I had exhibited in Gigantia. As you can see, there is also the element of the everyday use, the quotidian element. It's a cast of a sofa, but it was placed there as a site-specific work because there was, it's not seen here in the photo, at the lower part of that megalith, there was a design, like a constellation of dots, and I saw the link between those dots in the sofa. So that is a terracotta sofa. It's unglazed to have an affinity, a link with the arid textures of the temple itself. On the right-hand side, those are recycled balusters, columns, as if it's like reaching up, like being a bell tower or maybe a minaret of a mosque. So it's like also the relation between a space which is used for ritual. So finally, that's one of my public art pieces. So that's a sculpture, a 40-ton sculpture. It's called Hajarna. It's in Shara at the playing field. So it has a passageway, which from it you can see Gigantia in the distance. It's like tracing back our origins, because when you walk on the pathway, the floor, it's literally a giant painting of Terra Rossa, but then you walk on a sheet of glass. So you are like searching for the traces of your ancestors as you walk through. It's like a rite of passage. And there is also contemporary poetry engraved in the boulders.
Thank you, Victor. We could have continued till tomorrow because I know you've done a lot of work, but I think what was important to share this process. Wait, to share this process, this artistic process that Victor goes through to the creation of his work in relation with archaeology, but mostly within relation of finding something and developing something that dates back to our ancestors. And we see this common factor between artists in Malta as well, like Isabel Borch as well used to make reference to prehistorical shapes and figures, and this connection of process and the process of finding something and finding your history, and how that is reinterpreted in contemporary practice today, because I think it is very important not just to understand, but also how we reinterpret, right? I'm going to invite Annalise again with us for some questions from the audience. Thank you, Victor. Yes, please, you can move next to me. Okay. Right. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions, please. We have a mic over there. No one? Yes, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. First of all, thank you all for your presentations. They were very interesting. My question's for Annalise. You mentioned the ground penetrating radar study. Has that been done? And if so, where was anything discovered?
So yes, it was done
And
here.
I have another question. Shall I say them both now? And throughout the application process, the planning application process, as a result of SCH's involvement, were any changes made to the original proposal?
So the ground penetrating radar was done here. It mostly identifies changes in the bedrock and the material. There were areas where it showed that there were some changes, but when the archaeology is mostly in the deposits and the soft deposits, it's more difficult to identify what's happening with the GPR. So the results were mixed. However, in one of the areas where the GPR marked potential archaeological features, we found archaeology. With regards to the planning application, the project is still at design stage, and I cannot commit to that.
Yes, if I may add something else, we are still developing conceptual design regarding the outer garden development. So obviously, because we are at the really beginning of the stage of soil removal, we cannot submit anything at the moment to planning authority.
The investigation is still at the very start, so.
you. Anyone else? Any questions? No? I have a question actually for Annalise. Annalise, after hearing Victor going through his process, do you see any similarities to what you go through in the process of actually discovering and then, putting it?
Yes, we were discussing earlier how actually both art and archaeology interrelate. Victor goes through kind of like exploring what's around him and taking from what there already is. And basically that's what we do in archaeology. We explore what's around us. We discover the past. He discovers the past in his own way. And I think it can be very closely interrelated. I think he has archaeology and history very at heart, so it's very evident. So I think it's quite relatable.
Usually we go to museums, and we see all these artifacts and discoveries and we question, but what we do after is really interesting to me, like what we do with that data, with that information. How do we relate to it? How do artists relate to it? How do they shape it? Don't know if you want to.
What is interesting is that such practices don't give you answers, but they intrigue you to ask further questions. So that's the beauty of the work. So you are in an endless voyage. And sometimes you don't learn only about your ancestors, but you learn also about the present and what we have to do to not only preserve, but to prepare our future generations to embrace these important concepts and artifacts. And there is a huge potential that when also contemporary art in its with its methods enters a museum, which is not sometimes a contemporary art museum. So here I had two examples of how you can read archaeology, but also in the light of what's going on today with technology, with contemporary art, mixed media, digital art, and different forms of sculpture as well.
Thank you. Last note, which I haven't addressed. We have Antoine Farrugia here on site. He is sculpting a piece. He's on an artist residency. That's why you've been hearing the noise in the background if you're online. Antoine, feel free to go and see what he is doing. He is working on a piece which is a site-specific piece being transformed through the architectural and elements of the villa. And it's made of limestone, and he will continue developing it throughout the educational program until May.
AX?
And yes, and we are currently collaborating and being supported by AX, who are also the constructors who are helping us in the villa. In the front, when you entered, you've seen all the restoration processes going on stone, on metal. It's a long process. What is really admirable and what is really being done here is the care being taken of all the elements within the villa and the amount of detail and research being conducted before any works go further. So I would really like to thank everyone, the superintendents of cultural heritage, for their constant collaboration. TBA Pariti as well, who are the architects. We had even Professor Alex Torpiano last event for art and architecture. Joanna Popule, who is the director of LuginsLand of Art, and all the team who has been making this educational program possible, especially Boris Kudlichka, who is the idea and conceptual curator of the program as well, not just of the exhibition. If you don't have any questions, we will conclude. We have more works in the Citrus Gardens. We have a question? Yes, great. Okay. One last question, please.
With on the topic of archaeology, with the presence of the World War II shelters underneath the villa, where these, of course, have these been studied in the archaeology surveys by the superintendents, and will they form part also of the curated experience of Villa LuginsLand?
So with regards to the shelters, we know about their presence and there are surveys of them. With regards to the implementation of the project, since, as I said earlier, we are still at the very stages of the design, I am not in yet a position to respond because we are still seeing the way forward with regards to the archaeology and known and yet to be uncovered in the coming months.
Thank you.
Yes, it is good to know, note that this shelter is one of the biggest private shelters in Malta. It hosts over 60 people. And yes, it's a very important part of the building and its history as well. It's led us to many questions of the space and why it was there and how it was being used. It's good to note that the building will be mainly a residential in the future. However, it will have dedicated spaces in the front area for the artistic community. And these events are important because the foundation is allowing the public to appreciate the villa before its construction process and before it's being complete. Any more questions before we move forward? No, okay. Thank you once again for joining us online. I would like to thank again the OmenaArt Foundation and philanthropist and art lover Omenaa Mensah for making this possible together with director Joanna Populo of LuginsLand of Art. This is the start of LuginsLand of Art, and we look forward to have you in the next events. Thank you.